Whenever you squeeze labor, they tend to notice. So a bag of porcini mushrooms doesn't care how much it costs, but labor does. Even my brown students with big fat price tags on their head, they care when it goes down by 20%. So they tend to get together, particularly when they're already organized in factories, and they go, hey, you're like me, even though you're not. I'm Catholic, you're Protestant, you're white, you're black, whatever, I don't care. But notice this, he's still got all the money, and we're getting screwed. So they do things like form trade unions, right? That's how this happens. And they resist, and they strike, and they do lockouts, and they do sit-downs, and they do all that stuff. And essentially what you're doing is you're making life really difficult for capital to make a profit when it's already difficult to make a profit. The only way to make a profit is to get smart. So if you notice that big bouts of technological change actually don't happen because of the Schumpeter reason where there's a genius entrepreneur who walks onto the stage and changes the world. It's because labor and capital are doing this at the same time. And what do? They go, all right, if we can't screw you guys to get more money, how do we make you more productive? And that's when you get automation. That's when you get Fordism. That's when you get lots of technical changes. And that's what has always historically solved that problem. Now, why did that stop? Because everybody's benefiting. Well, there's two reasons. One of them has to do with the fact that that system generates inflation. Some of you are old enough to remember the inflation in the 1970s. Now, what happens here is quite interesting. When you make full employment a policy target, which is what you do after the Great Depression, World War II, and the Russians have half of Europe, right? And it's called communism. You kind of have to offer the working class something, which is the welfare state and the GI Bill and all the rest. You go to Berkeley for 50 bucks, all that sort of stuff, good stuff, right? That's there. But then, if I know that I can costlessly move from job to job because there's full employment, that somebody will always give me a job, then that means that the unskilled labor is going to get more expensive over time. But your skilled labor that you really need, holy moly, you're going to have to pay through the ass for this one, pardon my language. So what happens is skilled labor start to realize they're in a really monopoly position, and they begin to demand more and more price increases. Now, wage increases. Now, the only way you can generate profits for that is by doing what? Push up your prices. But if you just pushed up wages and you pushed up prices, nothing's changed. All you've done is create inflation. Welcome to the 1970s. And at that point in time, capital goes, this really isn't such a good deal after all. So what do? You basically kick your unions to death, which is what happened in the United Kingdom, the United States, and quite a few other places. But you reduce the power of labor. And then something else happens. You can finally globalize. Now, my favorite little example of this, if you forgive me, is this guy. So Steve Jobs is a genius. How many of the technology, there's 6 critical technologies in this thing. How many of them did Steve invent? 0. Do you know any of them, sir? You seem to know this story. Touchscreens, exactly. Who invented touchscreens? United States Air Force, taxpayer dollars. It's called Lodestar. TCP/IP, DARPA, secure communications in the event of a nuclear attack, backbone of the internet. What else have we got? GPS, United States Navy, global positioning satellites. You seeing a pattern here? You paid for all this stuff. Where's your equity share? You didn't get it. We just gave it to the private sector. But there is definitely value in this, because if you left it to a bunch of geeks in Bell Labs, they would never have thought of this. I mean, that's the honest truth, right? You actually need these people to turn it into commercial products. That's how capitalism works. We were doing this in the 19th century. But here's the difference. Where is this made? And about 12 other countries. But they can switch production from one Indonesian manufacturer to a Taiwanese manufacturer overnight and get the specs online in 3 days. What do you think the margins of those companies are? So what do you think the profits of Apple are? How much of the profitability of this resides in China at the end of the day? 6 cents in the dollar. This is what Donald's upset about. 40 cents still goes to Cupertino, right off bat. Now, where do they put their taxes? And they pay an effective rate of 0.02%. In the 1970s, corporates used to pay 20% of taxes. Today they pay 2%. Who's filling in the gap? Or we're dealing with budgetary austerity because no one has the balls to call them on it. Now, that's what's changed. You go back to David Ricardo for a minute. You've still got the competition. You have the competitiveness. You have capitalists squeezing labor. But labor was able to resist. Starting in the 1980s, they were no longer able to resist. Now, at the end of the day, the reason we do this is not because of the inevitability of something called globalization. It's because of a massive failure of public policy and a massive failure of spine by the people who are meant to represent those people, who don't, who represent Apple and Cupertino instead. Now, that brings us all the way back to Shaw. Because remember the play. Who's the guy who stumps up for the lease on the brothel in Brussels? A member of the industrial and aristocratic elite.